people avoiding shopping malls and public transportation, social distancing, and confidence effects. Trinidad and Tobago has not escaped the health and economic impacts of the COVID-19 crisis. We were already experiencing a decline in natural gas prices, and since September 2019, there has been a 40% decline in natural gas prices. This decline has resulted from weak demand, the restarting of nuclear power plants in Japan, and the increasing availability of LNG from non-traditional exporters. In parallel, and in the context of depressed demand conditions resulting from the global economic shutdown, oil prices collapsed. And at one point in March 2020, WTI entered negative territory. Since then, Brent has rallied to over US $40 per barrel. And clearly, the compliance by oil producers with their committed production cuts is paying dividends. But projected price increases will depend increasingly on the course of the virus and the associated demand conditions. Madam Speaker, consequent on the declaration by the World Health Organization of the virus being a pandemic, this PNM administration, under the astute leadership of Dr. the Honorable Keith Rowley, recognized early that the high transmissibility of the virus could lead to the possibility of our citizens being infected and loss of life. The health and safety of our citizens thus became the centerpiece of our public policy. We also understood that the economy would be affected by the pernicious effects of the virus. All available resources and expertise were therefore mobilized to design and implement a comprehensive response to overcome the potential health and economic crisis. Accordingly, since the arrival to our shores of the virus in March 2020, we have been able to contain community spread through effective and carefully thought out public health regulations, border controls, stay-at-home orders, self-distancing procedures, and good hygiene practices. Since March, we have recorded only 117 cases, most of which were imported, and our testing and treatment program to identify, isolate, and treat where necessary infected citizens is ongoing. More importantly, our testing capability is now more than adequate to meet our needs. Our approach has been to ensure a systematic resumption of economic activity, which is now taking place in a measured and safe manner, and in so doing, this government will protect the lives of our citizens at all costs and will not be reckless with human life. We are thus reopening the economy based on the best available scientific and medical advice. Madam Speaker, during this pandemic, whatever the health sector needs, the health sector will receive. Substantial budgetary resources have been directed to the health sector, and this has been aided by external financial support. Additional medical personnel have been hired, medical equipment and personal protective equipment have been sourced, hospitals and medical facilities have been and are being upgraded and commissioned where necessary, and specific sites are dedicated to treating infected people. Step-down convalescent facilities are also now in place. We have created a health system parallel to the traditional health facilities to respond specifically to the pandemic, which has been and continues to be an extremely effective approach. Allow me now to share with members of this House the principal elements in our comprehensive package of policies which have been put in place to address the unprecedented humanitarian, public health, and economic challenges posed by the pandemic. While the full effects and duration of the virus are still uncertain, our strategic initiatives have been swift and decisive as we stop the spread of the disease and minimize its economic consequences. And we did this all in the context of erosion of our oil and gas tax revenue base. Our fiscal and monetary response has provided a bridge to support businesses and individuals to help to ensure that the recovery will be as robust as possible. At this time, I would like to express our sympathy to all the families and communities which have been affected by this pandemic. I would also like to commend our devoted and hard-working healthcare personnel, medical practitioners, and essential workers for their collective responsibility for ensuring the containment of the pandemic. They are all doing a tremendous job, and they deserve our eternal gratitude. Madam Speaker, early on, as we sought to mitigate the health impact of the pandemic on our citizens, we recognized that economic activity would be curtailed and that particular economic sectors would be seriously affected, including tourism, hospitality, manufacturing, trade, distribution, construction, personal and professional services, and the arts, entertainment, and recreation sectors. We thus responded quickly and decisively with a broad set of policy measures aimed at assisting the poor and vulnerable, protecting businesses, jobs, and incomes, maintaining financial resilience, and sustaining economic activity. Accordingly, a targeted and sizable financial support program is providing a safety net for the most vulnerable households and businesses as follows. 25,000 existing beneficiaries under the food support program have received additional funding. 50,000 individuals who have lost their jobs or who have had their incomes reduced have become additional beneficiaries under the food support program. 20,000 households have become beneficiaries under the food support program, being households which receive meals from the school feeding program. 42,000 current beneficiaries of the public assistance and disability assistance grant programs have had their income support increased. 47,000 individuals who lost their jobs or had their incomes reduced have received salary relief or income support grants. Almost 3,000 citizens who have not yet received their senior citizens pension are receiving $1,500 in food support. Almost 500 individuals who have not yet received their disability assistance are receiving $1,000 in food support. 1,400 families in direct need have been provided with hampers during the stay-at-home period. 30,000 families in direct need are receiving food vouchers, and up to 10,000 families are receiving or will receive rental assistance. Madam Speaker, in this creative social agenda, the Ministry of Social Development is currently processing applications for income support grants of up to $1,500 per month per household for persons who are outside of the National Insurance Scheme and the Board of Inland Revenue Systems who have lost their jobs or incomes as a result of the COVID-19 measures. That is, persons in the informal economy. I'm told that 25,000 such grants have been paid so far by the Ministry of Social Development. Rent relief grants of up to $2,400 per month are also available. These and other social support measures will cost up to $400 million for the period up to July 2020. The government has expanded the reach of the food support programs by enlisting the assistance of our churches and religious bodies. Grants totaling $10 million per month for 3 months, May, June, and July, have been made available to religious bodies in proportion to the size of their congregations to allow them to distribute food to the poor and to the needy in accordance with their existing procedures and programs. The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government is distributing $30 million for food support within the 14 municipal regions in Trinidad. This program began in May 2020 and will end in July 2020. Emphasis on these food support programs will be placed on the supply of fresh produce as well as traditional processed foods. The Ministry of Works and Transport is providing a one-time fuel relief grant in the amount of $2,000 to 5,000 active maxi-taxi owners in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as a one-time fuel relief grant in the sum of $750 to be made available to approximately 15,000 registered owners of active taxis at a total cost of over $21 million. The Ministry of Finance is now at an advanced stage of processing payments of salary relief grants designed for persons registered for national insurance and whose employment has been terminated or suspended without pay as a result of the public health regulations. These grants are up to $1,500 per month for up to 3 months. And so far, over 22,000 persons have received these salary relief grants. And this is in addition to the 25,000 persons who have received the income support grants from the Ministry of Social Development. These 22,000 persons who have received the salary relief grants represent 70% of eligible applicants at a cost of over $32 million. Madam Speaker, I wish to point out that financial assistance is generally channeled to the working population in many countries utilizing tax and social security data. This is particularly true of the United States and Canada, where all citizens have social security numbers or Internal Revenue Service registrations. In Canada, registration with the Canada Revenue Authority is an essential requirement, and banking accounts are critical requirements. However, Madam Speaker, as I've said before, it is a matter of concern that only 420,000 workers, or 68% of our labor force in Trinidad and Tobago, of 620,000, are registered for national insurance, with 200,000 individuals, or 32% of the labor force, outside of the formal economic system. This must be corrected. But in the interim, unlike other countries, we are helping one and all, registered or not, whether in NIS or outside NIS. We are helping everyone. In addition to individual financial assistance, we are improving the cash flow for our business sector to maintain employment. Payment of outstanding arrears of VAT refunds to businesses is being accelerated, thereby easing the financial and economic burden on businesses during this strenuous time and facilitating in the process some measure of business continuity. Importantly, by this measure, we envisage the preservation of jobs at a time when most people need them. In March 2020, we issued over 3,800 VAT refund payments in cash to businesses with outstanding arrears of $250,000 per VAT period or less at a cost of $260 million. A few weeks later, we made the decision to pay out a further $200 million in cash in VAT refunds to businesses owed between $250,000 and $500,000 per VAT period, bringing the total of VAT refunds paid out in cash within a period of 4 weeks to $460 million. The remaining VAT arrears are being settled through the issuance of interest-bearing bonds. These fully tradable bonds bear interest at the rate of 3.3% over 3 years and are already being purchased by financial institutions from bondholders at par, that is 100 cents on the dollar. At last count, we had issued almost $900 million in VAT bonds in just 2 weeks, a tremendous achievement by our Inland Revenue Division. We are also taking the opportunity to expedite income tax refunds to individuals. To date, $240 million in income tax refunds has been paid out to 25,000 individuals, thus clearing off all outstanding individual income tax refunds. In just over 2 months, therefore, we have made accelerated tax refund payments in cash or bonds totaling $1.6 billion, Madam Speaker. All designed to inject money into the economy to keep people in jobs during this difficult period. Accelerated payment of corporation tax refunds via bonds or otherwise is also being seriously looked at. Madam Speaker, we have provided the credit union sector with $100 million for soft loans to their members. With these funds, credit unions will now be able to provide affordable loans of up to $5,000 per month for 3 months, or $15,000 in total to their members to carry them through this period. These loans will be priced at half the usual interest rate and will have very favorable repayment terms with a suitable moratorium. Another $100 million will be made available in due course to the credit union movement specifically for small and medium enterprises. We have also finalized a government-guaranteed soft loan program for small and medium enterprises in an amount of $300 million to be administered by First Citizens Bank Limited. These businesses represent an integral part of our economy and make a valuable contribution to employment creation. The program targets small and medium enterprises with annual gross revenues of between $1 million and $20 million. And the funds being advanced are intended for salary payments, working capital, and purchase of raw materials. These loans will be interest-free with a moratorium of 2 years. For businesses with less than $1 million in annual revenue, the National Entrepreneurship Development Company will be given the mandate to manage a grant facility which will be resourced with an allocation of $30 million. We have also made available to the Exim Bank a US $25 million per month facility for a minimum of 3 months to fund established importers to bring in food, pharmaceuticals, sanitary products, PPE, and other essential supplies during the period of COVID-19. This special Forex window ensures that there are no shortages of these essential items. We have also assisted, Madam Speaker, our UE students at Mona, Jamaica, and Cayville, Barbados, with grants for the purchase of food, and other students at regional institutions will be assisted in due course. The central bank is also working very closely with us to help the economy navigate through these difficult circumstances. And so far, reserve requirements for the commercial banks have been reduced by the central bank from 17% to 14%, and the repo rate reduced from 5% to 3.5%. As a result, commercial banks have reduced their prime lending rates from an average of 9.5% to 7.5%, narrowing the spread between lending rates and deposit rates, which will surely bring about improved efficiency within the banking system. It should be noted that whereas the reduction in the prime lending rate has an automatic beneficial effect on loans that have a variable interest rate, the commercial banks have advised that loan agreements with fixed rates require one-on-one consultation with the banks to discuss possible reductions. Central Bank has also provided additional liquidity through the freeing up of $2.6 billion previously held in reserve. Liquidity in the banking system is now at a record level of $10 billion. The banks are also providing a moratorium on mortgages and installment loan payments. Penalties are being waived on overdraft facilities on a month-by-month basis. Credit cards now have reduced rates and increased limits. Banks are being encouraged to reduce mortgage interest rates, and discussions continue between the banks and the Ministry of Finance on this issue and interest rates generally. Moneylenders have reduced interest rates and deferred payments. Credit unions are being encouraged to exercise forbearance. The Trinidad and Tobago Mortgage Finance Limited and Home Mortgage Bank are deferring mortgage payments up to 3 months in the first instance. The Housing Development Corporation is deferring mortgage payments for up to 2 months and more, which will be extended in the context of the evolving situation. Import duty and VAT is being waived or remitted on certain medical and emergency supplies to mitigate the pandemic. Let me now turn to Tobago, Madam Speaker. We are providing the Tobago House of Assembly with $50 million, or have provided them with $50 million, to fund the Tobago Regional Health Authority with its COVID-19 related expenses. We're providing $5 million for channeling to the Enterprise Development Program in Tobago to assist small businesses. We are making available a special fund of $50 million to provide grants to Tobago hoteliers for hotel upgrade and financial support, based on a plan developed and implemented by the Tobago House of Assembly. To finance all of this, Madam Speaker, we will, among other initiatives, tap the domestic capital market for such resources that are necessary. And this is being facilitated by the recent amendment to the Development Loans Act, which created substantial headroom for funding mechanisms. To that end, we have to date utilized just over $1 billion of the $10 billion available under the Development Loans Act. And most importantly, Madam Speaker, not the 20 billion touted by the opposition. We have just utilized 1 billion of the 10 billion available under the Development Loans Act. Moreover, we have approached multilateral institutions and development banks to ensure that appropriate external financing is also available to meet the requirements of the expanded fiscal deficit in 2020 and 2021. In the interim, we have taken steps to allow for emergency drawdowns from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund, not exceeding US 1.5 billion or TT 10 billion in any given year for budgetary support in exceptional circumstances, such as the current pandemic. As a country, we have long recognized the importance of building up a foreign exchange buffer through our Heritage Fund, which has a net asset value now of close to US 6 billion as of June the 10th, 2020. In fact, I checked today, and it is currently also $6 billion US dollars, which is US $400 million more than what was in the fund when we assumed office in September 2015, despite withdrawals over the period, over the last 4.5 years, totaling US 1.1 billion since 2015, and despite the recent volatility of the US stock market. At this juncture, I wish to announce that on May the 15th, 2020, the government withdrew US $400 million from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund for budgetary support, and not the $10 billion touted by the opposition. Madam Speaker, there is no question that fiscal 2020 will be exceptionally difficult, although the pandemic is expected to fade in the second half of the year, allowing for the gradual lifting of the containment measures and a reopening of the economy. In 2020, therefore, our objective has been to keep the economy moving, stimulate economic activity, provide financial assistance to individuals and businesses, and keep as many people employed as is possible, including all workers in the public sector. We consider policy and delivery execution to be an essential requirement to ensure that our citizens are able to steer through the crisis and come out of it more resilient. On April 16, 2020, the Honorable Prime Minister established a 23-person committee chaired by the Prime Minister and comprising ministers and esteemed representatives from the business community, senior public servants, academia, and non-governmental organizations to develop and design a roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago post-COVID. Madam Speaker, the government has received a first draft of that plan, the aim of which is to guide action in the immediate short term as the country navigates a challenging period ahead in which a new normal and a high degree of uncertainty will prevail. I will say more about the plan later. I now turn to the mid-year fiscal outturn. This mid-year review is taking place at a time without modern precedent. The pandemic has severely impacted economic activity, which we are addressing with a robust fiscal stimulus and financial support program. When all the priority areas are included and adjustments made in other areas, total expenditure for fiscal 2020 has been revised to 53.107 billion, almost the same as the original budgeted expenditure of 53.036 billion. Total revenue was originally projected at 47.749 billion, predicated on an average oil price of US 60 per barrel and a natural gas price of US $3 per MMBTU. The original deficit was estimated at 5.208 billion, or 3.1% of GDP. As stated on previous occasions, Madam Speaker, the adjustments included in the supplementary appropriation bill, together with curtailment of expenditure within most heads of expenditure, as well as an anticipated decrease in total revenue of approximately 9.2 billion, will result in a revised overall deficit of 14.533 billion, or 8.8% of GDP. When last I spoke on this matter in this House, Madam Speaker, I had estimated 15 billion. We are now estimating 14.533 billion. The Standing Finance Committee of the House of Representatives met on Wednesday, the 10th of June 2020, and agreed to a supplementary appropriation of $2,686,800 for the financial year 2020 in order to fund urgent and critical recurrent and capital needs to September 30th, 2020. The supplementary appropriation is being sought by way of the Finance Supplementary Appropriation Financial Year 2020 Bill 2020. Details of the proposed changes were circulated to all members of the Standing Finance Committee and discussed at the meeting held on Wednesday. At this juncture, let me advise this House that the supplementary appropriation of $2,686,800 affects 15 heads of expenditure and comprises recurrent expenditure of $2,518,374,800 and development program expenditure of $167,626,000. Funds for the supplementary appropriation will be sourced from overall savings in expenditure across all ministries and departments and from borrowings. Apart from the information in the report of the Standing Finance Committee, which has been circulated to all members, details of the proposals contained in the bill will be addressed by various members of government. And so, I will simply summarize at this stage. The supplementary appropriation affects the following heads of expenditure. Firstly, the judiciary requires an additional sum of $99,648,000 to facilitate the payment of monthly rental for accommodation, to pay salaries to contract officers, and to fill vacant contract positions within the various courts. Funding is also needed by the judiciary to meet outstanding payments for miscellaneous expenses and to pay MTS for janitorial and security services. With respect to the Service Commissions Department, the sum of $2,142,000 is required to meet the payment of rental costs for several properties. The Election and Boundaries Commission requires the sum of $43 million to pay overtime to staff who are expected to work beyond normal working hours in preparation for general elections at some time in 2020, and also to pay officers employed on a short-term basis to carry out field work in communities prior to elections. Funding is also required by the EBC to meet the costs incurred as a result of recently filed petitions in relation to the 2015 parliamentary elections and other expenditure associated with the impending general elections due by December 2020, such as the payment of traveling and subsistence to field officers, the purchase of materials and supplies, costs for postage, printing and advertising, training and rental accommodation, and so on. The Office of the Prime Minister requires a sum of $47,220,000 in order to enable the National Security Council to meet operational expenditure and to facilitate, most importantly, the disbursement of $30 million in funds to the major religious organizations to provide food support to citizens and residents who have been adversely affected by COVID-19. The OPM is also being given additional funding to meet debt service payments. The sum of $105 million is required by the Tobago House of Assembly. The sum of $50 million is required to enable the Tobago Regional Health Authority to meet expenditure associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, including training of healthcare workers, educating the public, establishment of primary healthcare facilities to meet the needs of persons in quarantine or self-isolation, and manage patients who test positive for the virus, as well as maintenance of a distinct pandemic response service to prevent disruptions in the primary and secondary care service in Tobago, and for the acquisition of personal protective equipment and other equipment, as well as the hiring of additional staff. Under the Public Sector Investment Program, the sum of $50 million is also required to enable the Tobago House of Assembly to administer the Tobago Tourism Accommodation Relief Program to give financial support to hotels and guest houses in Tobago and another $5 million to provide relief to entrepreneurs whose businesses have been impacted negatively by the COVID-19 pandemic. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Finance requires a sum of $880 million. The sum of $180 million is required to make payments to banks for various COVID-19 social support services, such as food cards provided by the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. The sum of $400 million is required to enable the administration of a salary relief grant to persons within the NIS system to mitigate the financial challenges experienced by persons suffering loss of earnings as a result of the pandemic. Madam Speaker, how much more time do I have?
Minister, you end at 3:44:31.
Thank you very much. Further, the sum of $200 million is required to enable the Credit Union Facility Program as a strategic response to the pandemic. Under the Public Sector Investment Program, the sum of $100 million is required to facilitate the award of contracts and the payment of project management fees to the National Infrastructure Development Company, NIDCO, for the construction of the new terminal and associated works at the A.N. Robinson International Airport in Tobago. The sum of $177,824,135 is required by the Ministry of National Security to effect payments of increments, overtime, and allowances to officers of the prison service for the upgrade and maintenance of the coastal radar system, to meet expenditure for the counter-trafficking unit and the witness protection program, as well as the rental of vehicles for covert operations. Additional funding is also required to enable the Strategic Services Agency to make payments associated primarily with its CCTV project and other works and projects. Within the overall sum, the sum of $5 million is required to enable the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, ODPM, to meet the cost of preparation for the 2020 hurricane season, including expenditure on personal protective equipment, stores, vehicles, and the National Alert State System. Madam Speaker, the sum of $76,550,000 is required by the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to meet the payment of salaries for additional contract staff, to pay outstanding fees to local and foreign attorneys for the provision of services, to enable the Legal Aid and Advisory Council to pay external counsel fees, to meet expenditure for the newly established Public Defender's Department, and to effect the payment of arrears to permanent staff and contract officers on the approval of terms and conditions of employment. With respect to the Ministry of Health, the sum of $224,582,640 is required to supplement the 2020 funding to facilitate payment to 11 new intensive care nurses from Cuba, 20 doctors attached to the Ministry of Health's COVID-19 hotline, and other staff in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Within the overall sum, $184,669,990 is required to supplement the allocation to the 4 regional health authorities to enable the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The funds are to meet the cost for consumables, infrastructure, and equipment, and the procurement of additional human resource services. Sum of $36,878,335 is required to facilitate the payment of interest on a number of loan facilities in the health sector for pharmaceuticals and other medical supplies, and for the redevelopment of the central block at the Port of Spain General Hospital, and for the completion of the Arima Hospital, which was built by the People's National Movement, and nobody else. Madam Speaker, the sum of $21,405,000 is required to supplement the funding for the on-the-job training program as a result of the 10% increase in stipends in 2020. With regard to the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the sum of $116,700,000 is required to cater for the 15% increase in wages to workers and fees to contractors within the Community Environment and Enhancement Program, or CPEP, announced in the 2020 budget. The sum of $20 million is required to supplement funding for emergency food support to needy households in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the sum of $40 million is required to enable the Rural Development Company of Trinidad and Tobago to continue the National Reforestation and Watershed Rehabilitation Program, recently transferred from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. Madam Speaker, the sum of $244,484,504 is required by the Ministry of Works and Transport for a fuel relief grant to 5,000 registered or active maxi-taxi owners, 15,000 registered or active taxi owners in the context of the adverse effect of the pandemic, for payments on a bond which was secured for the implementation of the program for upgrading roads efficiency, or PURE, and to enable the National Helicopter Service to meet its debt obligations, and for various expenses associated with the provision of the inter-island ferry service and the coastal water taxi service in 2020. The sum of $35,374,200 is required by the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs for arrears of payments and current payments associated with the United Nations peacekeeping operations and United Nations regular budget and working capital fund. The sum of $30,276,000 is required by the Ministry of Communications to pay increments and allowances to monthly paid officers to meet additional expenditure associated with the televising and information sharing sessions as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, provision of other services, works and supplies, as well as to pay outstanding bills and expenses for goods and services provided to the Printery, the National Archives, and Library Services. Under the Public Sector Investment Program, the sum of $12,626,000 is required to pay outstanding amounts for the upgrade of equipment at Trinidad and Tobago Television. With respect to the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, the sum of $581,794,321 is required to enable the recruitment of additional staff to fill vacant positions within the ministry, to provide additional financial support to NGOs, to enable meals, lunch and dinner to be provided to the homeless during the pandemic, to supplement the senior citizens grant allocation, to cater for existing beneficiaries and meet new expenditure associated with the increase of the number of senior citizens accessing that grant, and to supplement the 2020 Social Assistance Program allocation to provide additional support to existing beneficiaries and income support to families who experience loss of income as a result of the pandemic. Additional funding is also required for that ministry for rental assistance to families when income earners' employment was terminated or curtailed, to supplement the 2020 disability grant allocation through a top-up and to cater for new beneficiaries, among several other things. And that's the summary, Madam Speaker. The 2020 budget projected an overall fiscal deficit of $5,287.5 million, or 3.15% of GDP for the whole year. For the purposes of administration of the budget, which is front-loaded, Madam Speaker, an overall deficit of $5,885.6 million was projected for the period October 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 2020, which would have been reduced later on as revenue came in. However, based on actual revenue received and expenditure incurred, the government actually realized a deficit of $5,387 million for the first 6 months of the fiscal year, approximately $498 million less than the projected outcome. This was as a result of lower than expected revenue collection and lower than expected expenditure. Members are asked to note that the Ministry of Finance, in its mid-year review of the 2020 budget, was cognizant that certain areas require priority funding, especially with respect to the financial measures implemented with respect to the pandemic, in spite of the need to curtail overall spending. When all of these priority areas are included and adjustment made in other areas, as I indicated earlier, total expenditure has been revised to 53,107.5 million, a small increase of approximately 70.6 million over the original budgeted expenditure. Further, with the adjustments included in the supplementary appropriation, together with curtailment of expenditure within most heads of expenditure, we are reallocating expenditure to priority areas, as well as the estimated decreases in total revenue in 2020 of 9.2 billion. As I indicated previously, the fiscal deficit is now estimated at 14.533 billion. Members are asked to be cognizant of the fact that the majority of the supplementary appropriation is in respect of current transfers and subsidies, helping people. This is due largely to the occurrence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unavoidable related expenditure which has ensued as a consequence. But I wish to assure you, Madam Speaker, and the wider population, that this administration will continue in 2020 to manage the country's financial resources in a prudent manner. Allow me now to summarize our policy response to the economic challenges created by the pandemic. As with all other countries, Trinidad and Tobago has been hit by the COVID-induced sharp fall in activity and the oil and gas price shock. But we have been proactive and have taken immediate measures to protect the population and prevent irreversible damage to the economy. After the initial shock of 2020, we therefore project a moderate rebound over the next 12 months, aided by the full use of short-term stimulative policies which have been activated in support of the economy. This balance sheet flexibility is a differentiating factor as compared to many countries of the region. And once the necessary stimulus has helped stabilize the economy, we plan to bring our debt levels back on their earlier trajectory by the year 2023. We will do this at a pace that balances the goal of avoiding a contractionary consolidation while minimizing financial risk. It is noteworthy that our Heritage and Stabilization Fund provides us with ample liquidity buffers. Trinidad and Tobago's response, this government's response to the pandemic, was swift and proactive. Very early in the game, on January the 30th, 2020, we imposed restrictions on travelers from China and other at-risk countries, the first country in the Western Hemisphere to take this decision. Following this was the creation of an interministerial committee reporting to the Prime Minister, the Ministers of Health and National Security, and the setup of a parallel healthcare system with necessary equipment, infrastructure, and personnel. A series of public health restrictions then followed from March 19, 2020, which effectively contained the spread of the virus and prevented our healthcare system from being overwhelmed, as occurred in so many other countries. As a result, Trinidad and Tobago has been ranked by the prestigious Oxford University as #1 in the world in terms of its management of COVID-19 and its ability to exit the lockdown without undue risk to the population and economy, thanks to this PNM administration. We are now engaged in a purposeful, systematic, and carefully planned reopening of the economy, starting with the food, beverage, and hospitality sector, then the industrial, construction, manufacturing, retail, and distribution and services sectors. Churches are being allowed to resume activity, and restrictions on outdoor activities and public transportation are being gradually eased, and so on. Partial reopening of our borders is occurring with the carefully supervised return of nationals from overseas, while maintaining strict quarantine and isolation arrangements to mitigate against the spread of imported cases. However, the combined shocks of the collapse in oil and gas prices and the disruption in economic activity, both here and overseas, have provoked major changes in our economic forecasts. Accordingly, we have revised our baseline scenario for macroeconomic projections based on new energy price assumptions of US $45 for oil and US $2.90 for MMBTU for gas in 2021. We're looking ahead in order to assess the actual impact on our economy, public finance, and external situation. Based on our comprehensive fiscal stimulus program, we now project a decline in GDP in 2020 of just 2.4%, rebounding to a growth of 4.7% in 2021, with a continuing inflation rate of 1% or less, consistent with our policy of easing the burden of price adjustments on the population. It is noteworthy that there are abundant resources to face gross funding needs over the next several years under the stressful conditions created by the pandemic. And there is ample financing available to cover the primary deficit and debt service. Indeed, at this time, Trinidad and Tobago is unique among countries of the region in that there is no liquidity crunch given the variety of funding sources available in spite of the dislocation of the global market, including over $20 billion in potential funding from multilateral agencies such as the Inter-American Development Bank, the Andean Development Bank or CAF, the World Bank, international and local banks, bilateral partners such as China, and the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And on top of all of this, we also have access to almost $4 billion in low-cost funding, rapid financing instruments from the IMF, if at all necessary. In order to maintain economic momentum, we expect a temporary increase in our debt to GDP ratio to just over 70%. But when this government, Madam Speaker, when this government returns to government within the next few months, having weathered the economic storm created by the pandemic, decisive and prudent action will allow us to bring back net public sector debt to GDP to its pre-crisis level of 63% by 2023, owing to our medium-term fiscal responsibility approach and the recovery of the economy under the next PNM government. With respect to our Heritage and Stabilization Fund, despite withdrawals in 2016 and 2017, and most recently in May 2020, HSF assets have been on upward trend in the recent years, reaching a high of US $6.5 billion in December 2020. The value of the fund's assets decreased to US $5.7 billion in May 2020, following the COVID-19 outbreak and the collapse of world stock markets. But the fund continues to recover most of its losses, and as of today, stands at US $6 billion, US $400 million more than when we assumed office in September 2015. It is noteworthy that under this government, over the last 5 years, the HSF assets increased from just over 24% of GDP to almost 28% of GDP. Following an influx of foreign exchange from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and international loans, our foreign reserves are now also quite healthy at almost US $7 billion, or 8 months of import cover. Simply put, under this government and my team at the Ministry of Finance, we are in a good place. This is why, after a grueling round of evaluations over the last month, in the midst of the pandemic, by 4 international credit rating agencies, namely Standard & Poor's, Moody's, Fitch, and CARICRIS, we have maintained good credit ratings. This has reflected itself in the good performance of trades on the New York Stock Exchange of our 2016 US $1 billion international bond, which continues to strengthen and improve in value, trading at very strong yields. Testimony to the confidence of the international community in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. It is because of this excellent economic performance that Trinidad and Tobago continues to be rated by the prestigious Economist magazine as 15th in the world among 66, 15th in the world among 66 emerging economies in terms of our ability to withstand the adverse economic effects of COVID-19. Scoring well in all 4 categories, such as public debt, foreign debt, cost of borrowing, and reserve cover. Indeed, in terms of reserve cover, we have been deemed to be among the strongest emerging economies in the world. And to be clear, this is not PNM saying so. It is the economists and Oxford University determining how well we have done. Madam Speaker, our overall policy response has provided a measure of relief and stability to the national community. In a confidence-inducing framework, the national economy is being kept alive, and we are doing so in a transparent manner. We are keeping the phased approach to the reopening of the economy under constant evaluation, and we will continue to adjust phases as we learn more from the medical experts. The pandemic has posed the most serious threat ever to our social and economic well-being. However, this administration has acted and will continue to act forcefully, aggressively, and proactively, utilizing all tools at its disposal to provide critical support to the economy during this challenging time, to create the conditions for its recovery and diversification, and to ensure that the recovery as it commences becomes sustainable and job-creating and be put on a trajectory of a new normal. And Madam Speaker, consistent with our policy to seek the broadest possible consensus and advice from among the best minds in Trinidad and Tobago, the economic roadmap prepared by the Committee of 23 is now providing ample guidance for us to take advantage of this window of opportunity. We are particularly pleased with the emphasis on both short-term and medium and long-term objectives of the roadmap. The implementation of a targeted and sizable support program to provide a safety net for the most vulnerable households and businesses is well advised, and we will seek to expand the scope and focus of the social safety net wherever feasible. We will reach out to the vulnerable individuals and communities to meet their basic needs. And very importantly, we will correct existing inefficiencies in the delivery system and harness technology to improve delivery and targeting of beneficiaries. Civil society organizations will be accorded key roles in this exercise. Madam Speaker, the preliminary roadmap committee report focuses on 8 sectors, which would be the foundation for a revitalized economy: agriculture, construction, energy, manufacturing, services, wholesale, retail and distribution, banking and insurance, small business and credit unions. Tobago is accorded a special status. An enabling environment is critical to the transformation process. The roadmap stresses that the agricultural sector should be geared to making the country a more food-secure nation. Productive capacity is recommended to be increased with a reduced dependence on specific imported foods and accessibility to domestic produce, creating in the process strong linkages among the food, value, and distribution chain. A significant agricultural stimulus package of $500 million is proposed to launch this program. The roadmap points to the need to revitalize the construction sector to create jobs and economic activity in the quickest possible time, with the commencement of a number of new projects injecting considerable funds into the economy. In parallel, new private sector shovel-ready projects have been identified for immediate implementation. The roadmap also emphasizes the urgent need for revitalizing the energy sector and an assessment of the sustainability of the gas value chain. Madam Speaker, with the support we are providing the manufacturing sector, the committee is of the view that we should quickly emerge from the shock brought about by associated closures. The tourism sector requires particular attention. The committee recommends a task force should develop a tourism recovery plan. Incentives should also be expanded, as well as emergency support grants for micro businesses and a liquidity support program for small and medium-sized tourism-related businesses. The wholesale, retail, and distribution sector are expected to undergo a transformation. Tobago has also undergone a severe shock on account of the closure of the borders to visitors, closure of restaurants and bars, and the sharp decline in inter-island traffic. And Tobago will receive all of the support it requires in terms of construction projects, expansion of its enterprise development program, support for the hotel and tourism sector, and so on. Madam Speaker, this very brief summary of the suite of policies is supported by a series of cogent, practical, and compelling actions in the areas of ease of doing business, building institutional capacity, critical supporting infrastructure, and national value systems. I end by saying, Madam Speaker, that I am firm in my view that no other government could have managed the crisis created by COVID-19 in the way that this government has, this Dr. Keith Rowley government. Our robust, sensible, proactive, efficient, and comprehensive response to the virus has received worldwide acclaim and endorsement. I am proud to be part of this government that has been ranked as #1 in the world in terms of dealing with the multifarious demands and health and social and economic challenges caused by COVID-19, way above and beyond all of the countries of Europe, United States, and the Far East. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I beg to move.